The first time I spoke here was last year. The talk, I titled it was 5 Stages of Contact. And so every time I try to speak, I try to cover more information because it's such a vast subject that involves so much. It's just impossible to cover it all, even for a whole day, for 8 hours straight. So I promise I won't leave anything out for you that is, that you feel like you've been gypped on or you didn't get what you needed to get. But I have to move on with some of the information. So any of these talks are online at the ufohub channel under the playlist talks, and you can watch these back. Basically, there's a little bit more of my history and other things that have happened to lead me to this point. Because believe it or not, I used to be normal at one point. So, can I get a quick show of hands, please? How many people are familiar with the UFO subject? Okay. And how many of you are avid researchers? Okay. So, I'd like to give a little disclaimer before I begin. What I have to say and the way I approach it is based on my experiences. I started with this when I was 15 years old, and it evolved and led me to where I am today. And it changed my perspective about UFOs, because when I first started out, it was all about the nuts and bolts, where they're from, what kind of materials are the ships made out of, and things like that. But as the years went on, and I started opening my mind and trying to understand why these other things kept coming up. I was, trying to figure out what Stanton Friedman would say, which is a very scientific researcher. People would talk about channeling. I would try to understand what this guy would say because he had some kind of top secret clearance, and I just kept hearing more information about, governments interacting with all these different alien races, and then there would be all these other spiritual things coming into play. And so, as the years went on, long story short, and I promise if you go back and watch some of the other talks, through my little experimentation with different things, I died. And at that time, I thought it was an accident, but now I know there are no accidents. It was something that I needed to experience to see what I needed to see in order to understand what's going on more with aliens and UFOs here in this world. And so the talk, what I would like to do is, instead of sitting or standing here about talking for the whole hour, I want to try to condense it in about 10-15 minutes, and I want to open it up for questions and answers, because you have questions that are more pertinent to you, and if I can try to get to them, to answer them for you from my perspective, I feel you'll get more out of it instead of me just talking for an hour, and maybe you might get the answer you're looking for. So the talk for today is God, aliens, and everything else. And the reason why I involve God in this is that as much as I wanted aliens to be these beings from different planets that are kind of having life experiences as we are, and having their own lessons to learn as we are, that is also true. But there's a greater picture here when it comes to these different visitations. And I find that the more I sit back and try to see what the big picture is, I realize the picture doesn't have a frame. The more I step back and see, okay, what is this about? I see how it all comes together. I step back again, and I see how it all comes together. So I just basically stop putting it into a box, because it's hopefully, as you'll realize, it's almost impossible. So what happened to me during my, I guess, near-death experience is that all of us are basically made out of this one energy that I guess you could call God, but I just would like to describe it as the all that is. And that's actually a description by a channel called Bashar. He's channeled by Daryl Enka. And I think it's the most accurate representation of everything, because it it's not male, it is not female, it's actually both and more. It's all of us, the chair, that everything is made out of, and that perspective is difficult to understand from our five sense reality, from seeing, hearing, smelling, feeling. All these things are still everything in a box, so to say. So your limited understanding is all based on your senses. So as I understood at that time, that my death experience was basically to get me out of this, fully out of this, to where there was no sense of body, no sense of time, no sense of anything else but the perception of yourself, who you are and how do you play in this place called existence. And it was actually the reason why I started out doing this different kind of research is that I just wanted to know for myself. I never intended to start a channel called ufohub. I never intended to eventually speak. It was all after these experiences that certain events had happened and certain messages were given to me to just, you've seen how it is, go speak. You've seen how it is, go speak. And so, I was kicking and screaming, being dragged to eventually do it. But the more I became more comfortable talking about these different things, more information came, and things that I had forgotten that have happened to me came back. And so, again, going back to God, aliens, and everything else, we're all made out of that same energy. And these different beings visiting are basically also these other versions of yourself that are having all these experiences as societies, their own trials and tribulations, and they're on different levels. We are, I guess you can say, here and they're over here. Now, that doesn't mean that they're better than we are. It's just two different states of understanding of what all of this is. And so what you quickly realize when you lose sense of your body is that there's actually no limitation on that scale. If you think you're here, there's infinity up, infinity down, and infinity in every other direction you can think of. And so that means there's an infinite amount of other versions of yourself, infinite amount of other societies, infinite amount of everything and anything you can possibly think of, which is a very difficult concept to grasp. But when you're out of your body, you feel it. You just feel it and you know it, that is the part you've always been part of. And so you don't usually, the mind usually just kind of always stops you. It is the one that has the fears from to have you go look into certain things, to the fears of what are my friends going to say, what are my family members going to say, what are people at work going to say, and because it's designed to stick to these rules and boxes. When you go to work, you do a certain thing, and that's all you do. When you go, to certain events, this is how you behave, and this is how you interact with these people that way. But when you're simply taken out of those rules, out of that little box, you realize this whole thing is nothing more than a nut house, in a way. It's basically all these different versions of the all that is, or just a simplified God, having all these different interactions with yourself and basically with other beings that you perceive as someone outside of you, but actually is just part of that other energy expressing itself in different ways, as male, as female, an angry person, a loving person, someone with a persona, a personality, and all these things. So it's a great illusion, basically, that we walk around and we say, well, you over there, you don't know what you're talking about, and you over there, you're the one who did this to me, because that's the world we've designed to interact with. But in reality, it's all a reflection back to you, stating if you see something that's happening, there are no accidents. So if you're perceiving something, it happened for you at that moment to look at. So a lot of us like to always have the in the sense that, well, this has nothing to do with me. I'm aware of it, but this has nothing to do with me. If you become aware of it, it has everything to do with you. You know, if you hear about some war in a distant country that you can't even pronounce, you say, well, that has nothing to do with me. It has, because the second you become aware of it, the second you hear about it, even as you're passing by a stranger in the street and they're having a conversation with somebody else and it pops into your mindset, it has something to do with you. And so the challenge of this game is for you to go about and find out what that is. Because a lot of times when I was younger, I would have all these different experiences and they would happen, but I'd say, well, that was just a dream. That was just an illusion. That was just something that has nothing to do with me. No one else has these experiences, so I shouldn't be worried about those things. And so it was only when I physically set out to learn what they're about, to go after what was this thing that I saw, why did this happen to me in this way, only then did it reveal itself and show me more of what it is that I needed to know and needed to learn. What was very interesting about perceiving reality from a different point of view is that this different energy has its own different rules. And these rules work regardless of what you may apply to it. You can say, well, this works because of this works because of that. It's like this basic underlying process that no matter what happens, it will always work this way. And I believe because of these misunderstandings over the years, we've kind of gotten ourselves in trouble. Not with anyone out there, just for ourselves, because our society has become more discoordinate, not knowing that how these rules work. And so, for example, one is particularly that some of you might be aware of, called the law of attraction, or what you put out is what you get back. So that basically works quite simply. You have an intent, you state basically what it is that you want, you put it out and you let it go, right? And so the thing is that because of who you are, all these things that you basically put out will be attracted to you. So after all my experiences, I came back here and I was looking at more things. I grew up originally in the Muslim religion, and I've given it up since I was 15. I realized it's not working for me, but I didn't just give it up and say I don't want to have anything to do with it. I studied it, studied Christianity, Buddhism, all these different things just for myself. And I quickly realized that's all we were doing all the time. But all we do every night, whenever it is, whenever we sit down or wherever, we would sit there, oh Allah, oh Jesus, or these different, whichever one, Krishna, all these different religions. We have an intent, we put out what we want, and we trust that God will take care of it. And then so I sat there and realized, well, it's exactly how this system works. It's just that we apply an image to this functionality that works by itself. So I don't mean to sound insulting, but when you really think about it, I could say this podium, oh dear podium, please give me a car. And I have my intent, I put it out, and I let it go. And when through circumstances things happen, and I get a new car, I'll go, thank you podium, I really appreciate it, And so you basically, if you don't have that guidance, that energy can be basically put into anything you want. So over the times, we've gotten ourselves, like I said, in trouble with all these different religions, and that, well, when you ask Allah, when you ask Jesus, when you ask any of these other deities, not that they're not valid in their own right, but something comes back, we would say, that's my proof that they exist. That's my proof that this works. And so that's one of the aspects that was shown to me kind of being outside of this little bubble. And so to tie this back into aliens. So because of what we put out is what we get back, we're putting out energy all the time. Who you are is constantly being projected. and all the things that mesh with you are constantly trying to get to you. But we do a really good job of keeping them away, saying, well, I'm not ready for this yet, or doing things to basically sabotage ourselves. And so when it comes to aliens and contact, it was actually very amusing that in the movies, we depict them as these two-headed, eight-legged monsters. They're coming to destroy the planet and take over our resources. And understanding what I understood about law of attraction is that it was actually a very amusing thought, or an amusing concept that we as society are exploring, is that, well, naturally, for who we are, putting that out, we will be attracting the type of extraterrestrial beings that will be closer to us, looking similar to us, so that, for one, it'll help us better understand how to move on and make that transition to this point into their type of society and technological advancements and things like that. And so, it was funny to me how then over all these years we've constantly have applied a fear mechanism that extraterrestrial contact is something that's always and only going to be detrimental to us. And so I think that summons up a basic concept about just one aspect of what I experienced. So I actually just would like to leave it open to whatever you like to ask me, whatever questions you have regarding what I said, regarding something else that you might have in mind. And I just want to let you know that whatever answer I give you is based on my own experience. I know you might have some information you might have read somewhere else or seen, and whatever it is you're talking about, if it correlates with me, we could probably talk about it, but I do not wish to go into areas that are not of my understanding, so that if I give you an answer, I'm giving it to you straight from my experience. So just letting you know ahead of time. Go ahead.
Do you mind talking about your NDE, what exactly happened to you?
Sure. She was saying, do you mind talking about your NDE? Well, when during my studies, I came across the channel, Daryl Anka, and he channels Bashar. And they claim to be one of the 5 hybrid races that were the result of this hybridization program that we've been hearing about, aliens and whatever goes on their ships. Well, actually, that was a full program that I don't know if it's still going on or if it completed. But just giving you a little background about them. So I was listening to what they had to say, and they were talking about beliefs. And they were talking about beliefs and how important they are to us and how rigid they are. And so he was talking about that, change your belief about something and the way you look at it, and your perception about that thing will now be different. And so I was doing that for everything. I mean, I was looking at the friendships I had, in the relationships, work, all these other things, and also when it came to psychedelics. And so here I was constantly saying, well, psychedelics are bad, and blah, 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 and I stopped and I said, why? And so I basically set out. That was in my previous videos, I talk about how I set out to learn what I could on these different things to see what I will get out of it. Well, the NDE happened by me basically, I guess for lack of a better word, overdosing. And it was all, later on I saw that it was all orchestrated from the get-go to happen in that way. But what happened initially was that I took too much of these, they're grown in South America. They're called the Hawaiian baby woodrow seeds. And you're supposed to they look like coffee beans, and you're supposed to take one, for an experience. I took like 15, 12 of them, And to a certain extent, it can be too much for the body. The same way that you have water, you can, drink too much water, you drown. You have too much of anything, eventually it will be harmful to you. Well, unbeknownst to me, not knowing that, I just thought, well, too much of it would just give me even better experience. And so I quickly, after I ingested it for about 2 hours, nothing was going on. So I just gave it a rest. I thought everything was done. And I happened to get up, and I just felt this change in my heart to where all of a sudden my body started to weaken. And so I've known for previously that some of the general side effects of psychedelics would be, paranoia, and you might, vomit and things like that, but this was different. And so as I went on, I was like, it will be fine, everything will be okay. So I went and drank some water. Well, my body started getting weaker and weaker and weaker, and then I hit a state to where I can only describe as where you just know. No matter what you think, you might explain it away, you're going to die. It's a very distinct feeling that this says you've done something that you're going to leave this body. And so I started freaking out. And a lot of these things were just, I was trying to get out of it. I drank a lot of water. I tried puking it out, trying to cleanse myself from it. But there was this, I wouldn't say a voice, but more of a feeling, but it felt like it was coming from outside of me, just saying, there's no getting out of this. And so I was pacing around my room. I was trying to slap myself in the face, just trying to keep my body active and moving my fingers. Because the second I stopped being still, it would all just sink in, and the light would just slowly kind of fade away. And it was for the body at that time, it was a very fearful experience, because, at the time I was 29 or so, and I was like, I have so much to do, I don't want to die, all these things will come into my mind. And basically, as I lay there, just gasping for air, and I was just holding on the best I could, I just heard this voice saying, you're gonna die, but you're not gonna die. You're gonna die, but you're not gonna die. So it just kept repeating over and over and over again. And so basically I was holding on, and I took basically my last breath, and as I just kind of breathed out, I was out, And it's not something that obviously I expected. I can't say that anyone really expects what happens afterwards, but one of the first things is that I saw my parents. Now, this is the part that was confusing me even afterwards. They're not dead. They're young 50-year-olds, and still very active, living their lives. But they were very young, maybe in their 20s, my mom and my dad. And so for a second there, it wasn't walking, it was just kind of floating towards them. And I just kind of hugged them. I never questioned, why are you glowing blue? And things like that. But it was just something that I went towards them and I hugged them, and it was just this connection and love that I just can't describe. I mean, take a love you had for a person, and multiply that by 1,000, and it's just this unguarded, full love you have. Excuse me. Well, so what happened then was, as I was trying to, hold on a minute, you're not dead, so why are you here? I immediately got a memory that came back, and basically it was the weirdest thing for me to remember this, an agreement that I made with them to be my parents. And I actually begged them. I said, please be my parents in this way, because in real life, I know in America, a lot of people have their definitions and views on abuse, but in other countries, that's just how you raise children, So anything you do, you get the hell beat out of you. Whatever it is I do, I get smacked over the face, beaten by whatever objects there's around me, just to get me to be this good child and do all these other things. Well, you as spirit know yourselves very well, and you know exactly what you need in this life to become who you can become. So I beg them to be these people, to be this constant wall I need to hit against, because it kind of bounced me back and forth to get to this point. Because by going through what I went through with them, it made me emotionally stronger. It gave me an incredible skill to deal with other people that are abusive, and 100 different things that resulted from that experience. Now, I can't expect everyone to understand this part, but that's just what happened to me, the recollection that I had, why it is that I set out to have this agreement with them. And so I said, all right, well, then it's changed from that scene to a different scene, which was my ex-girlfriend at that time. It was a scene that I remember very well. She was standing by a car, I'm standing here, and we're kind of like, I'm angry, I have my arms crossed, and she's like, yelling at me, why did you do this, and all these other things. And I'm kind of hovering like a fly around this scene, and I know it well. And so as I'm looking to see like, oh, what's gonna happen, who's gonna win this argument, that type of thing, I looked over, and as she's going like yelling and talking about stuff, she just stopped, looked over at me and winked. And then she continued talking. And as that was happening, I basically just got this download of information. It says, we are all always aware of what the other person needs. And so we're there to push each other's buttons, to do these different things that we might like or might not like in life. But eventually, there's no evil, so to say. Each person is playing their part as the little speck of God that they are, basically to reflect to itself something else. So by me acting up the way I did, I reflected something to her. By her acting up the way she did, she reflected something back to me. And so we do that in every relationship and in every interaction we've ever had in our entire lives. And so that's just one or two examples of many, many more that were a bit more mind-twisting to me and had to basically, when I came back, kind of chew on it, try to figure out. But I hope that kind of explains your question. I gave you a little background of how I got there instead of just getting to the point. So, anyone else? Any questions? Well, do you guys want me to keep talking for another 20 minutes? Okay. Well, I mean, it's a very broad subject, so I'm not trying to put anyone on the spot. Is there any specific thing you would like me to cover? Because whatever you might come up with, I can give you 20 minutes worth. Okay, well then, for the sake of this conference, because we're covering ghosts, we're covering aliens, we're covering Bigfoot and all these different things, let me then get into that and what it is that I learned regarding that. All these different things that we perceive as UFOs, Bigfoot, cryptozoology, chupacabra, ghosts, all these different things, they're all basically aspects of you interacting on a different dimensional level that are basically happening to you at whatever point to get you to understand something more about yourself. So let's say you're at the mansion, you're just taking a tour, and all of a sudden you look over and there's a lady dressed all in old-fashioned clothing and whatnot, and you turn around and go, wait a minute, that looks out of place. You look over and she's gone. You might be camping and you're in your tent, and all of a sudden you just hear this groan, and you think it's some kind of animal. I got to get out, protect whoever is around and yourself maybe. You come out and there's an 8-foot Bigfoot standing in front of you. All these things have initially just perceived as there's a threat, I need to deal with it. So, you have, and no, I don't mean any offense to anyone when I say this, you have, people go, well, let's have Bigfoot hunters or UFO hunters, and we're going to get to the bottom of this and things like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can go about that process because on your level of understanding, that's what you feel like you have to do. But just to save you a little bit of time, is that if you understand that all different aspects of yourself that have occurred to you in your life at that moment, that means they're there to tell you something. Whatever that is, you have to pursue it. I didn't know that when I was 11 and I had this this experience to where I thought I was going to sleep, and the next thing I know, I find myself, on this table with all these different beings surrounded. I was trying to kind of focus to figure out what's going on, because it was a muddy vision to me. And as I focused on that, one of the beings turned around and saw me, because I guess I focused hard enough to where I got its attention. And it had not what you would expect. You would think it's little aliens, but not to my perception at that time. They were more like maybe 2 foot tall frog-like faces. That one of them kind of ran over. If you ever seen a small person run, because the stride is not that long, they have to kind of hop to get to you quickly. And so he was holding it like a king's scepter that hit me right in my forehead, and I woke up. Now, of course, I could have easily dismissed that as just a dream, something crazy, and just leave it be. But there was something that constantly kept bugging me, constantly was in my mind, and it was that seed initially planted for me to be here today. Now, of course, there's thousands of other experiences, but the point was that very thing that has happened, whether it be a Bigfoot, a UFO, a ghost, all it is there for you to finally start going into that direction. Now, that direction could simply be as far as reading a book about ghosts, and that's all you'll ever do in your life. Or you become so obsessed and such an avid researcher, I guess, to truly go about figuring out what all that was. So, anyway, anytime you have something weird like that happen to you, just understand that there's these different frequency levels, like the example of ice, water, and steam. They're all within this reality, but we perceive them in different ways. And so that's just one spectrum. And so your eyes are designed to keep you level in this spectrum. It's from this to that, these are all the colors you know. From this to that, this is all that's physical, this is all, that's non-physical, gases, atoms, all these other things. So try to kind of see it from that perspective, that it's there just to tell you that something happens. You don't necessarily immediately have to grab a camera, get your all the gear with you and going out there and trying to measure this, try to measure that. Try to understand it's about you. And so something silly, but try, for example, meditating. You want to go and, let's say, go investigate some place. Try to meditate, to calm yourself, to get yourself in a certain calm level, calm state, because that then allows you to, if there's any kind of energy around that is slightly different, to adapt to it, which then will help your eyes work better to perceive a ghost or whatever else might be out there. Otherwise, most of you know this, if you go there and you're kind of closed off, most of people have always just felt a very strong chill down their spine, like, I got freaked out, I didn't want to go down this hall, I just knew something was there. Well, that's your body's reaction to this different shift in energies. I've done it often enough, many times over, to realize that really, when it comes down to it, that's all it is that there's a different energy, different from you. And so instead of you calming down and adjusting so that you can perceive it better, we immediately freak out because it's so different, and then we just turn around and run. So I'm not judging anybody, but I'm just explaining that we've done it often enough. And I would just recommend to do these different things in that way. Do you have any other questions, maybe? Anything that might jot your memory? Okay, 15 more minutes. When I was regarding UFOs and what I've just explained, they have this different energy and this different level of existence. So naturally, because of what I explained to you earlier with my parents, and understanding that we all have agreements and things that we play out, that's what we're doing worldwide. And so we all have these different games that have to be played out. For some people, it might take them 10 years, 5 years, or even their whole lifetime to play out the certain event or path that they have in their lives. And so these different beings that are on these different vibrational levels, not trying to focus too much on direction, but looking down, they can see that we're playing these games. And it would be very disruptive if they just showed up. Try to imagine being in a theater and you're on stage. And let's say on the stage you're playing out a play that somebody killed somebody and they're trying to figure out who it is, you know. And so that's the premises of this play. And so it would be them showing up. It would be as silly as you from the audience getting up on stage and telling the other actors, say, he did it, he's the one that's done it. You know, and all the actors, they go, yes, we know, we're just playing. And so it would be an equivalent similar to that we are basically playing out these certain rules and laws that we have set up for ourselves here, and they have to finish. And so there will be a time where things would be more, I guess, more conducive for contact, as we would like it, with ships showing up and things like that. But for right now, it's just going to be individual basis and occasional footage and pictures that we've seen as we have throughout all these years, until enough of us have finished up with our path and our games that we play, to where now it's finally the time and for them to just come on down and say hello. And so that's kind of in short regarding UFOs. Same thing with ghosts, is that ghosts to us, because of these different frequency levels, it's too different to immediately accept it. Because we as a society, and playing a game as a society, it's something easier for us to comprehend. So naturally, our change in consciousness would naturally happen as in, oh, another civilization coming from outer space to visit. That more to our physical minds is acceptable. If we all of a sudden went from the non-existent, invisible thing to where all of a sudden appearing all over the place, it would be too detrimental to our state of minds. So again, there's these levels of paths and games that are happening on multiple levels. So on individual level, societal, governmental. So all these things just have to kind of align just right. Everyone concluding all the games they're playing for the next step to move forward. Now, of course, like December 21st, 2012 was one of those demarcation periods, because a lot of people were afraid of that, the world is going to end and things like that. When you really think about it, the world did end at that time, the world as we knew it, because it was a point to where we've gotten to a point where we played enough of our games to where more things could happen and change. And then look just at this time level from 2012, how many more things came out about governments, how many more things came out about what governments really know, things about our political system, things about ourselves as a society, what we find acceptable, what we don't find acceptable, and just simply look at all that turmoil that has come out since then. Now, most of us can look at that as, a chaos, that's something to fear, or just realize that all those things have finally come up to the surface about racism, about all these different things about ourselves as a society have come up to basically show us, and so it's there for us to work on, trying to figure out, because we've always had these things. I mean, if you look at 60s and you have the, forgive me, if it was 60s or 70s, you had the sexual revolution, and then about how we all perceived women and workplace and all these other things. As a society, we started looking at all these things that didn't work for us, and so that will naturally progress. It's not going to stop, but it will progress to each change is going to positively change our vibration bit by bit, to where now it's going to make it a lot easier for us to interact with other beings that now are going to bring more information than what we've already known. more understanding, more points of view, or to look at certain things than what we have before. So, go ahead.
Are you familiar with the Disclosure Project?
Yes.
What are your thoughts about that?
Everyone needs to hear different things in different ways. I encourage every avenue that is there, because some people need information or need to be conveyed information in that way. Others need it in different ways. So there is no right or wrong. It's just because we're so different, everyone has certain approaches. So, other than hoping that for them to just bring an understanding to those people on that level, to as many as possible, that's all I can say regarding that.
Do you think it's helping, because a lot of it is with government people or pilots or people who have had a lot of reasons why not to talk about their experience?
Well, let me tell you something else regarding governments, and try to understand it this way. We as a society have fears, so we needed a government to protect us. We as a society see ourselves as weak, so we needed a government to make us strong. So you have to understand, as much of negativity or whatever definition you want to put on government, understand that it is something we've created from the get-go because of basically our weakness in our consciousness and physicality. So if you want to bring about change, as they say, be the change you want to see in the world. So instead of blaming someone for only being, because look at how many things that we don't want to know about. Look at how many things that we're afraid of. So now all of a sudden governments are looking into all these things and behind closed doors and secret projects and black book operations and things like that. They're only doing what we've set them up to do. When we, as each single individual, prove that we're grown up enough, mature enough to handle our own lives in our own certain way, believe it or not, those things will simply cease to serve the purpose that they have so far, because they're only there because of our need of protection. And so these projects, these different things that are being coming about, and government is giving you a little bit here and there, they're not giving you anything. It's basically enough societal level, enough energy has changed to where now the government can now do all these different things, release information bit by bit. Because before they couldn't, we were too fearful. But now, with our mind and our energy change, now it can come out in the manner that it has. So whether you're a fan of government or not, I'm just giving you my perspective of energy exchange. Of this, remember what I was saying earlier, everything is just energy, and you have to kind of see how that energy interacts with yourself. So that's my take on these different government disclosures and things like that. And think about it. On societal level, people need that. If you think about somebody that all they've ever known is just, I don't mean anything bad by this, just, baseball games, football games, hanging out with friends, playing cards and things like that, just a normal life, to all of a sudden be hit with all this information that's been here this whole time, it's too much. But when government releases them bit by bit, it gets their attention. So that way, it's also helping them on their little step of understanding and going into the direction that it eventually goes. So I hope that helps. Okay, well, one last question. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming. Thanks for listening. I hope you got something out of it. So no questions? Okay, good deal. By my table, I have some free books, and please take as many as you want. They're on different subjects, courtesy of Ozark Mountain Publishing. I used to work there, so they hooked me up with cases and cases of books. So yeah, they have different subjects on that. So whichever one you feel drawn to, go there and take one. So, all right, thank you. Appreciate it.